This is Will Tchakirides interviewing Charles Harrison for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is 12:45 p.m. on February 21st, 2025. This interview is being recorded virtually. Mr. Harrison is in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I am recording from Houston, Texas. All right, Mr. Harrison, may I call you Charles for this interview?
Sure.
It's great to have you. I'm going to start out here. Can you just state your full legal name for the record and tell me what the last position was that you held in HBCU radio?
My name is Charles DeVerney Harrison, and I was music director at WSHA in 1978.
Thank you. All right, Charles, we're going to take this all the way back to your very beginnings.
Okay.
Can you please tell me the full date when you were born and where you were born?
I was born February 28th, 1956 in Rocky Mount, North Carolina.
Thank you. And Rocky Mount, North Carolina, can you tell me a little bit about that place? Let's say this is the movie of your life. Why don't you describe what that opening scene would be, what your childhood looked like, sounded like, smelled like?
Well, Rocky Mount is a southern town. It has a unique history because it is divided by two counties, Nash and Edgecombe, and it's divided because the railroad track is what divides it. But the railroad was there before the city, so the railroad wouldn't move, and so the railroad comes through the town, which divides the counties. It's one of the few and maybe only city in North Carolina divided by two counties. And so yeah, I mean that was something very recognizable growing up because the train would stop the traffic, if it came through. And so of course that was something that we got used to. It was a very again vibrant town, in industrious, surrounded by agriculture, tobacco and farming. I had a chance to participate in that, not because I lived on a farm, but because I ended up having an opportunity to work on one in tobacco when I was young. Um, but it was again, very vibrant during the time of segregation. I didn't go to an integrated school until I was in the ninth grade. Um, but again, a very vibrant community. And a very fun time growing up. And I learned a lot later about Rocky Mountain, how pivotal it was. It was a banking community because of agriculture and that economy there, and of course also the railroad coming through the town. Um, and some very famous people are from there. Thelonious Monk was born there and lived there until he was 9 years old and moved with his mother to New York. Um, and so I just remember growing up, it being a lot of fun. My parents were working class people, um, but I had a very good young life and can recall a lot about it because it was very positive.
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned your parents. Can you tell me a little bit about the people who raised you, where they come from and what they
Yeah, my mother and my dad were from Nash County area. My mother from an area called Red Oak, and my dad from an area from Nashville, the town of Nashville, which both of them are near each other. Um, and my dad had a very interesting working life. I was born into his unique ability of training horses. So I grew up around horses. um, at an early age, and came to really love horses because I was around them. My mother was a domestic worker. She only had an eighth grade education, but continued her educational interests later on as a young adult. Um, and my father became a mechanic and ultimately a truck driver, mechanic. But he had a lot of different skills, and so I picked up a lot of those from him. They married at a young age, and it was four of us in my family. I'm the middle child of the four, if it's an even middle number. Um, so again, we wouldn't have been considered, we would have been considered middle class, maybe not upper middle class, but we had most all of the amenities that we could want as young children, and surrounded by a lifestyle of varied people, educated, uneducated, but working people. Um,
Thank you. Did their families extend generations back? How North Carolina?
yeah. My dad's father was born into a family, a pretty large family. My great grandfather was born in 1865, Samuel Harrison, and from his first wife, he had six children, which included my father, and then no, which included my grandfather. I'm sorry. And then um, my father's father uh, again was well, I had that part mixed up. My father's father, my grandfather, had six children from the first marriage, and that wife died. So he married again and had seven children from the second wife. So it ended up being 13 children altogether. Um, and that was actually a lot of fun growing up because my grandfather was having children when my father was having children. So a couple of my uncles and aunts are only like 3 or 4 years older than I am. But we all grew up in a very happy, lively family. So, and then on my mother's side, she had, it was five in her family, and my grandfather, my mother's father, moved with us after her mother died suddenly in 1955. So my grandfather on my mother's side lived with us all my life, and that was very very rewarding because, he imparted a lot of common sense, a lot of euphemisms that, I got to know from his language when I ultimately discovered what they meant. So, so that was a very um, good time growing up around somebody like that. My mother's father was born in 1886 in Halifax County, which is near Nash County, and that's where my mother grew up at, and ultimately moved to Nash County. Um, and and he had a very good recall of dates and times. So I would hear him talking about, 1929, just times, you know, um, during the lifetime, the decades. So when I look back on it, that was a very good introduction to historical events during that time, which also included weather. He talked about hurricanes, some of the worst hurricanes that took place back then, Hazel being one that I remember. Um, and again, and he was an uneducated man, but educated enough to be able to, carve out a life and impart wisdom to his children and his grandchildren.
Yeah. Thank you. What were your parents' names?
My father was named Charles Harrison, Charles Lindbergh Harrison. and my mother's name is Lily, Llie Harrison. She was a Hedgepeth.
Okay. Now, growing up, you've spoken to this a little bit, but what are some of the issues that mattered to people? What it may be in response to events or political issues of the day? What were people concerned about most?
Well, when I was growing up, my parents were not really involved with, any of the civil rights movement or anything like that. We were aware of all of those things going on. In fact, Martin Luther King came to Rocky Mount in the early 60s. Um, and also, I found out later that he started testing his own speech. I have a dream speech at Booker T. Washington High School, which was the black high school there, um, before it was a formal speech entitled that. Um, and so, again, my young lifestyle and growing up was more centered around community. Um, my mother and father moved to what became one of the first housing projects in Rocky Mount. They built two, one for Black community, one for the white community. Both of them look exactly alike, but on different sides of town. And then as my father's income increased, they bought their first home in 1959 or 60. And that's where I started in the first grade, um, from that house. So, um, I did get the advantage of growing up both in a housing project community, which was a really positive community during that time. Nothing, it was all community. I started in kindergarten at the community center there, and of course transitioned to elementary school, which the school was in that neighborhood too. And again, it was just a fun time. Even though the experiences of, where they built their first house, it was a community that was developed, but it didn't have paved roads at the time. The roads were dirt. But and where we lived also was not annexed into Rocky Mount. It was not in the city limits. But once it was, after about 5 years, maybe around 1964, 65, the streets were paved, and it became and it participated in the city amenities with sewer and water and trash pickup and all of those benefits of a taxpayer, in a city.
Yeah. What were some of the community institutions that really brought people together?
Of course, church was one of the main ones. We didn't attend the church that was in the community. We attended the church that was in the community where my mother was from in Red Oak, about 10 miles from Rocky Mount. At least in early on, but my brothers and sisters and I did join a church that was in the city at the time because that's where my grandmother on my father's side lived. Um, so I would say, yeah, those activities, but also activities around the high school. My sister was in the band, and that was probably motivation. Not probably, it was motivation for me to want to be in the band. And I didn't know what I wanted to play, but I ultimately came to play the trumpet. I got a trumpet for my Christmas present when I was 9 or 10. And I ended up playing in the band from junior high through college.
It's awesome. Was music on in the house growing up?
Very much so. We were immersed in music.
What would I hear?
You would hear all of the hits from the time. Of course, James Brown was very popular during that time. Most of R&B, not necessarily jazz, but R&B and blues. My mother and father were not necessarily in they were not into music like we came to be into music, the kids. And so we had an opportunity to buy the music, and that's pretty much how music came into our house. At the time, during that time, there was no black or urban radio in Rocky Mount. So we got 1 hour of R&B music on Saturdays from a guy that had a show on the station in Rocky Mount. But when I look back on it, we didn't miss a beat with music because music was shared with community, with family during that time. So you got exposed to all of the hit songs that were out that were popular. Um, and that was our introduction. And back then, most of the gatherings were in individual homes. So between homes, you would hear different music. And by the time I was in junior high school, I was buying my own 45s. And my sister got a job at a record shop. So we got exposed to a lot of new music that came to the record store even before we heard it anywhere else. And that was probably the seed that was planted into me to love music and understand how it impacts you um, from a dance perspective as well as from an inspirational perspective.
Yeah. Do you remember any of the types of songs or that you would play on trumpet when you first started out?
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of, well, two of my favorite songs. I believe both of them came out in 1968. One of them was um, Soulful Strut by Young Hope Unlimited and Grazing in the Grass by Hugh Masekela. So right now, out of any song, those are my two favorite songs.
And do you remember the first time you heard radio or in which stations those were? Would it have been that Rocky Mouse?
Y- Yeah, it was the show. Well, we listened to the radio the radio station that was in Rocky Mount. It was called WRMT. So it was a top 40 station. So, and this is the other part of that. Because we didn't have uh, a black radio station in the market at the time, uh, we listened to the top 40 stations. So I also became very familiar with a lot of popular, white artists from listening to that radio station. Uh, and so that's why even now, I have an appreciation for Seals and Cross. Summer Breeze was, one of their popular first songs. Diamond Girl. And so a lot of those songs and artists I was introduced to by listening to the radio in combination with the other R&B music. Um, so yeah, I mean, that would have we listened to the radio, yeah,
Yeah.
and it included news too.
Do you remember do any of the news programs or issues of the day stand out from what you heard on radio?
Yeah, I remember this guy. His name was Earl Nightingale, and he probably had a commentary, is what I was hearing, because it always came on right before we got ready to leave to walk to school. So that would be an alert to what time it was also.
And which schools did you attend?
Susan C. Baskerville Elementary School, J.W. Parker Middle School, um, this is before integration. And then when the school system integrated, my ninth grade year, Parker Junior High, before integration was seventh through ninth. And when integration was implemented in Rocky Mount, then it only went to eighth grade. So we had 1 year of ninth grade at another school, which was the integrated class, and that was R.M. Wilson, which used to be a white junior high school. And from there, we went to Rocky Mount Senior High, which was the white high school, um, that was integrated and to replace Booker T. Washington High School as a high school. So Rocky Mount had one high school by the time I segued to the 10th grade.
Yeah, what did it feel like to be a part of that initial attempt at integration?
We talked a lot about that. We just had our 50th class reunion, high school class reunion back in the summer. And, maybe unlike some other schools, even though the majority of us had not gone to school with, you know, other races, white, including, not going to school with black kids, but we assimilated very easily. I mean, there were no issues that I can remember we had. And we talked about that recently at our class reunion, like I said, and it made for such a fun time. And we were all together for 4 years, which it's normal now because ninth grade is part of high school, but ninth grade was not part of high school back then. It was part of junior high school. But we were all together again for 4 years and we got to really know each other. And again, there were no problems. We assimilated very well. We had fun. And through senior high, through the 12th grade, I mean, we all, pretty much stayed in touch. It was still, again, a segregated time. So it wasn't like, we just hung out all the time like that, or it was a norm. Um, it was probably a little abnormal to see a black person and a white person, whether it was two males together and especially a white female and a black female or a white male and a black female, because it just was not common at that time. And it was not looked upon, with, you know, um, approval
Mhm. Was it a
by
situation
the community.
it was not looked on with approval by the community?
Right.
What was the busing situation? Would they transport black school children to these white high schools during integration?
Yes. And I became a bus driver. And during that time, you kept the bus at your house. So, and for me, I mean, I was motivated to do that because I figured I had to go to school anyway, so I might as well get paid for going to school.
So you were a bus driver at a young age in
Oh
the
yeah, and back then, bus drive you could if you had your license. So I became a bus driver in the 11th grade. So I was a bus driver for 2 years.
was that your first job?
No, I started working for this man who had a floor finishing company when I was 12 years old. He had a maintenance and a floor finishing company. So I learned how to refinish and finish hardwood floors. He had most all of the contracts to do the janitorial services, cleaning up banks and corporate buildings, churches. So I learned how to use buffers, all that equipment, and the application of stripping and waxing floors. Um, so those were some very good trade skills that um, I learned that became very useful for me as a young adult, especially working with wood.
Getting back to this question of race a little bit, tell me in a little more detail what the demographics of Rocky Mount are like. Is it a equally black and white community? Is one population larger than the other? What was it like?
Well, it could have been, I don't know the numbers, but I would say it would be equally, you know, equal in numbers for the most part. Um, yeah, I mean, you had some large white families just like you had large black families, um, and generations of those families. Because Rocky Mount was Rocky Mount, actually, Rocky Mount is considered the midpoint between New York and Miami. So it was always vibrant and traffic coming through there because 301 was a major highway before 95 was completed. It runs north and south. And so that was the stopover point for, travelers coming, well, not only it was 95, but Highway 64 runs east and west. So the midpoint is Rocky Mount. Like if you were going to the coast, you were coming from, say, Tennessee, Kentucky, or somewhere, the stopover was Rocky Mount. And they had a lot of motels in the town off the highway. So I believe that, that continued to help put Rocky Mount's name on the map because of the highway structure.
And what was the terrain like? Did you say it was mountainous?
No, not really mountainous. It's pretty flat area, except for as you go west, Highway 43 runs from Rocky Mount into Halifax County, which is a little more hilly. And but other than that, Rocky Mount pretty much is a pretty level geographical area.
When you were in school, what did you like to study? What did you feel like you were best at and what interested you most?
It sure was not math. After math changed a lot. But I think also it's the way you teach any kind of course of study. I'm the type of person that I have a creative side, so visual and just the way the information is communicated is how I receive it best. Um, but there early on was not, any one subject that I really kind of gravitated to. But when I look back on my academics, I realized that I did have a knack for writing. Um, and that has, you know, was elevated into my adult life. Not a structured writer as such, but being able to weave words properly and creatively together became a forte, and I really didn't know that at the time. But when I recall and look back on some materials that my mother had kept. Things that I had written, and said at a young age, um, were very impactful. Uh, and so, again, that was probably the foundation for my writing style, which um, came as a result of, reading a lot, not only through college, but beyond that. And it also was very helpful when I got into radio um, during that time, because when I got into radio and at the level that I got into it, it wasn't separated where we had a copyright if I needed a commercial, if a commercial needed to be done. The salesperson just went out, sold advertising, and came back with bits and pieces and gave it to the announcers to write a commercial about it. So, my creativity and ability to, um, you know, sell the product through what I wrote was a process of an unstructured environment in the radio station. He's just like give you pieces of the copy and you just create a commercial. I mean, and we didn't have at the time at that station examples in a book, that you could look through to, do a copy for a supermarket or a clothing store, that kind of thing, which eventually I had access to later. But before that, it was just you as the creator of this commercial injecting not only the words, but the energy and inflections to be able to sell the product. Because not only did I write it, but I would have to produce it. Not only with just words, but maybe pick a music bed that would fit it. And again, the station that I worked for originally, when I was doing an internship, it wasn't sophisticated to the degree that we had a library of music beds to fit different commercials. We had to create it, and a lot of what was created, the beds were instrumental jazz tracks from music we had in the radio station.
Very cool. We'll get there. Um, what went into your decision to attend college at Shaw? Had you heard about HBCUs? Did you always know you would attend one? Were there others in the
Well,
community with you?
no, because a lot of my teachers when I was growing up, most all of the black teachers did go to HBCUs. The influx of black students at colleges like North Carolina State, UNC Chapel Hill, and Duke didn't really start until the early 70s. And then even then, it was sporadic. So again, most of the teachers did go to different colleges. But when I was in high school, in my family, there were nobody that had gone to college around me, except a couple of my friends that went to North Carolina Central. And that was one of my first colleges that I started going to their homecomings, and I would go visit him when I was in high school. But my sister went to Shaw University first. She's a year older than I am. And when I went up to one of the games, she had become a majorette. And when I went up to one of the games and I heard the band, I knew that I had to be in that band because in high school, well, outside of Booker T. Washington High School, which was closed by the time I got ready to go to high school, our band was more of a disciplined marching band. When I was in high school, we were good. We played a lot of great music. The band directors, well, the band director from Booker T. Washington, when the school integrated, went to Rocky Mount Senior High. So it was two band directors. One was from Booker T. The other one had been at Rocky Mount Senior High. And, the music that the band plays is usually at the directive of the band director. So when I was in high school, most of the music that we played outside of the structured sheet music, marching band music, we played Chicago because Chicago was a very popular band at the time. But around that time, so was Earth, Wind, and Fire. But we didn't play Earth, Wind, and Fire. We played Chicago. And there was nothing wrong with that. But that is what I was saying to myself and even to the band directors. Why can't we play that? But we didn't. But we still were a great band. And so let's see, you asked me what was it that made me gravitate to going to Shaw? Or
Mhm.
forgot the last question.
Yes.
Part of so anyway, yeah, I mean it was just the dynamics of that band. And that we could, entertain because that's what the band does. I mean, when I was in my high school band, when we marched, we had to hold our instrument just straight to our side, marching like little soldiers. And, I wanted to add a little rhythm to it, swinging my horn or,
Little flavor, right?
And but we learned the basics of band marching and keeping the line straight and all of that. So as far as the fundamentals of being in a band and a marching band and even a concert band, um, all of that was rooted in junior and senior high school. Because even in junior high school, we had a very good band teacher, a female teacher that was very good, and my formative training and learning in band started in junior high school at the Black high school. So by the time I did get to high school, I was prepared and could read music, and I was pretty good at playing the trumpet. I wasn't the best. I mean, even though I played first trumpet, there are seats before the person in the first seat, and they played, and it's the passion that they have. They played at a whole nother level of, octaves that I may not could play, but I could play, you know, well enough to be considered for first trumpet.
Did you
And
make first trumpet?
what'd you say?
Did you make first trumpet?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. Yep. So, and so, you asked me why I went to Charlotte. So yeah, it was that. And so I didn't, and then I also with the SAT, and I just can't remember all of about it, but I probably wouldn't even have gotten in college based on my SAT score. So, um, and I didn't know how that weighed at the time. I had already just made up my mind that I was going to go to Shaw University. So, the SAT score wasn't something prohibitive. It might would have been if I was trying to get into UNC Chapel Hill or North Carolina State at the time, because my SAT score wasn't good. It didn't mean that I wasn't academically astute. It just meant that I didn't do well on that test. But so I was pretty satisfied that I was going to Shaw University and going there with no other interest except playing in the band. I didn't even know the school had a radio station.
Yeah. No, before we get there though, and maybe this is a similar feeling to what you felt the first time you saw that band and your sister being involved in it. What did it feel like when you went to North Carolina Central and saw what a homecoming was about? What did it mean to kind of step onto an HBCU campus for the first time and feel that culture?
Oh, it was incredible. I mean, very festive, very family oriented. And, just even looking back on it, I mean, it was from a parent standpoint, I mean, it was um, a very giving parents that even allowed me to drive up there at 16 years old to go there, to stay for the weekend. But that's kind of how it was at that time. I mean, and and even with that being the case, for not for whatever reason, but even with me being exposed to North Carolina Central as my first college experience, it didn't make me just want to go there. And my girlfriend at the time, had gone there. She was a couple of years older than me, and she went to North Carolina Central, as did one of my best friends. But it was the band at Shaw University, even though North Carolina Central had a band too. But just that, I guess, intimate exposure at that time to Shaw University's band made me know that that's where I was going to go.
And you entered college, if I'm doing my math right, around 1975-ish.
What'd you say?
1975, around the time when you
Yeah, I entered Shaw in September 1974.
74.
Hmm.
So when you're at Shaw, what is your first experience with that radio station? How did you hear about it, and what did you make of it when you did finally hear of it?
Well, it was, when I came to Shaw, the band came 2 weeks before the students came, just like the football team. So I got to Shaw, you know, and exposed to that before the majority of students came. And I can't remember exactly when I saw it, but as I got my course of study together, um, my exposure was in my first class there that I had signed up for. It was probably a introduction communication class, and that's how I got to see the station. And then I saw other students working in there and being on the air. But even then, my first experience wasn't on the air as an announcer. It was on the air as a news broadcaster. I started out in news and continued through um, my tenure at Shaw because we switched up. But then when I saw and heard the announcers, performing their show, well, two things happened in the after my freshman year. I stayed. I entered a program called University Year in Action, which was like a internship program, and you got to work and I had declared a major at that time, which was communication. So I got to work at a radio station, which was WLLE, and it became the station that I ultimately got a job at. But I was simultaneously working at WSHA and WLLE. But it was initially in news. I was doing the newscast. And as I hung around and I saw the guys on the air, playing the music, um, that made me gravitate more to that. And then I had an opportunity to in the summer of 75 because I stayed, in town, when a lot of other students left. You had to live off campus as part of this program. So I had an apartment and so the staff was short. So I got a chance to be on the air more in the summer of 75 because it was a limited staff. So I was getting more practice and learning a lot more about music, which I already knew I loved. And back then on the albums, it had all the liner notes with all the different artists. And Shaw's radio station, was really set up and structured, very well at that time. We had a library of all kinds of music. So it was an incredible time for me to learn about artists that I didn't grow up knowing about, especially jazz artists. I knew a lot about R&B artists, not everything, but because they had the liner notes on the back of the albums, when I'm on the air, I could sit there and read the liner notes. And I also use some of that information um in my on air conversation about the music because I could take notes from the liner notes.
So this is great. You're giving me you're sparking a lot of questions in my mind. So
Okay.
at WLLE, was that more of that was the news on there?
Initially it was, yes.
And then was at WSHA, did you do news as well there to start, or was it music to start?
News.
Okay. But you also did some music as well at WSHA.
Yes, yes, because they had segmented the format was segmented. Um, my show, and this is how I learned more about jazz. Was a show called Jazz Spectrum from 2 to 6 every day. So we took, different shifts. I might have been on like Monday and Wednesday or something like that. But during the summer, I could be on as much as I wanted to because they needed staff to man the station.
Yeah, got it. In that time period, 75, 76, who is involved in the station at that time? And then I want to know Jazz Spectrum's one. I want to know some more programs that you recall from that time period.
Yeah, we had a variety of different programming. In fact, we had we they it was already set up when I got there, but there was a show that inmates from Central Prison recorded. It was called Perspectives from Within. And so we would air there. They would basically, you know, talk around the music and introduce music. I can't remember all of the content that existed, but it was an informative show. But, you know, with Shaw's ability to extend themselves into the community, and obviously at that time, the prison system didn't have an issue with them recording. They had recording equipment inside to do that because they delivered the tapes. We just played the tapes. It wasn't live.
Yeah, how would that work? So they would record inside of the prison, and then someone would deliver the tapes to the station?
Correct.
And was that a weekly program?
Yes.
What did you make of that idea? That there were in prison?
Well, I thought it was very creative. You know, I didn't really um, do a lot of examining the process or anything like that because I'm facilitating it on the air. You know, I never even saw who the people were or even know more than what the program presented itself for. And I guess because I was just so involved with so much more, I wasn't intricately involved in that other than facilitating it, and I didn't have an interest in pursuing to know more about it at the time. It was something set up by the general manager of the station at the time, a gentleman by the name of Carl. Um, I want to say Anderson. It might have been Anderson.
Carl Anderson. Was Paul Vandegrift still involved in the station at this time?
He came later. He came after. Um, after Anderson left, or I think he came after that. Mr. Vandegrift came probably around 1970, late 76.
I see.
Hmm.
And how about Miss Check? Was she around still?
Check.
Does that name
I
ring
don't
a bell?
I don't remember Miss Check.
Okay.
Do you have, was
She's
it a time period that she was there? Do you know? I
there
don't
were
remember a female by that name unless she was a part of the library
She would have been in
staff.
the communications department. She helped to get the station off the ground in '68, and I'm not sure.
Okay, so no, she was gone by then. I never remember her around. She could have been in a different capacity, but she wasn't in the station at that time.
No worries. And then was Bob Kyber one of the managers at that time?
Yeah, he was one of my instructors.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was funny. It was he taught a class that was called Black Man in Mass Media. So, you know, the students around that time, I mean, and it's an obvious question. You know, one of them said, "Well, how can a white man talk about how a black person experienced, you know, mass media?" You know, but we had a lot of very astute students there, many of them coming from different parts of the country, you know, New York, Chicago, um, and he handled it well. I mean, I remember him. I remember him being, you know, pretty animated. But he was only there, I believe, for the 1 year I was there, which would have been between, not 1 year I was there, but he was there between 74 and 75. And why does that name stick out to you? Did you know him or is he still around?
No, just from my research in the archives.
Yeah. Okay.
Who were some of your mentors there? Who do you think made the greatest impression on your work as a radio professional at Shaw?
Um, well, by the time Mr. Vandergrift came, you know, he did extend himself to us, and you know, he was the type of person that you know was very engaging and knowledgeable because of his own experience in the military and in radio and broadcasting wherever he was. He did do a show on the TV. I believe he was on TVD, WTVD. And it could have been the ultimately it was the PBS station. He did Black Issues Forum, I believe it was.
Hmm.
Um, But really, the biggest impact on me were other students. And these were students that were ahead of me. One guy in particular that really gravitated to me, and I often ask if anybody knows where he is. His name was Pedro Romero. And Pedro was very good on the air. And he was also very passionate about the professionalism and how we presented ourselves on the air. And he was very knowledgeable of music. So, out of anybody, he probably had the biggest influence on me, and he saw the potential in me. And we became very good friends. And he was at Shaw probably, well, during the time I was there, because he came before me. He was from New York. He was probably there at least the 3 years out of the four that I was there. And he critiqued, me. Um, so he was very instrumental. And it was not just him. There were other students that were very professional, that I emulated. And, I started listening to a lot of other announcers on stations around here. And I used to go to Washington, D.C. a lot. So I would listen to announcers there. I remember when Donnie Simpson first came to KYS, and I liked the way he presented himself on the air. And I think from not just for me, but for other students too. I mean, you hear somebody else that you want to sound like, or you appreciate their professionalism or how they present themselves. And so, like, for example, a lot of students coming from New York wanted to sound like Frankie Crocker. So, so uh, but I didn't grow up listening to Frankie Crocker. I may have been that same way. And it's good that I didn't grow up just listening to any one particular person as my voice evolved and my personality um, evolved.
Yeah, thank you. I should
Well,
have asked also just what it felt like to come into Raleigh, to come into a larger city, and what some of the differences were you noticed from where you grew up in Rocky Mount.
yeah, I mean, as far as the total Raleigh, because one, we were pretty much relegated to Shaw. I didn't have a car when I first came there. I really didn't get to see all of Raleigh or view it as a big city. My circumference was pretty much just Shaw, St. Augustine's, this area downtown, um, until I got a car. And even when I did, the out the larger parts of Raleigh um, actually seemed far away from the campus. Once I did, I got a car and I would drive out. And ironically, when we talk about full circle, I'm back where I actually started. I moved back to Raleigh in 2016. Well, I lived in Raleigh with my wife and children up until 94. Moved to Charlotte and lived there 21 years. But we sold our house and bought our house back here in 2016. But in coming back, I'm back in near the area that I first started at. Um, so it's been a beautiful evolution of where I started and where I am now, and it's a continuation of it, even now.
But I got to ask you then, what do you feel like is different about Raleigh coming back to it from versus what you remember as a student?
Well, I mean, for sure, it's more metropolis now, and like a lot of downtown areas, the the um the gentrification, is different. I mean, even in the neighborhood around Shaw, I mean, it's integrated. I mean, and that's when I came back to the area in 2016, it was almost like a culture shock to one, see, the development in downtown Raleigh, even though Charlotte was growing like that too, but because I was intimately involved with the communities around Shaw, and I could really observe how different they look now. That was the culture shock. But also, you know, um, it was a positive because I saw community, and the willingness um, of people, black and white, to live near each other. I mean, I understand part of it. I mean, of course, downtown was attracting, more people downtown. So, and of course, the focus is being safe and a livable area. I was glad to know that, Shaw is part of that development process, even at what they call the Shaw District now. Um, so it's a community effort to bridge the gaps of the communities and make them whole, make them one.
Yeah, you mentioned that word community, and I'm gonna use that to get back to your time at WSHA. How did
Mhm.
you understand the relationship between WSHA and the community? Like, what was that relationship like, and how did you help advance it?
Well, during that time, which is it was really a disadvantage, but an advantage at the time. In the late 70s and early 80s, well, and beyond that, the Raleigh market did not have a 24-hour urban radio station. WLLE was a daytime station from sun up to sundown. So in the winter, when the sun goes down at 5:15, the station signs off the air. So the only station that the community, the black community, had to listen to was WSHA. And even then, FM wasn't the frequency of choice. And, what I came to see also, I mean, and it's a college radio station, so it's a training ground for students. So you're not going to have professionals on the air presenting themselves in that manner all the time. And but the community, I believe, was interested more in the music versus how a person sounded on the air. I thought it was a pretty, a missed opportunity for business owners not to want to invest in an urban station since most all people love R&B music or music that's produced predominantly by black artists. But the power brokers at that time were unwilling to invest in a frequency that would target the majority black community. So Raleigh was late in getting an FM frequency or even a 24-hour AM frequency by choice because the business community who had the financial ability to purchase chose not to put a urban station on the air in the Raleigh market. So it was a very late situation into the mid 80s. Um,
We should think about that kind of as a segregation of the airwaves, right? Is it?
yeah, absolutely it was. Yeah. I mean, and even when there was when WFXC when came on the air, it didn't come on the air until 1983, and then it had a limited um, broadcasting range. Um, because of the assignment it had with its frequency. And so the only thing that made it better was when the Federal Communication Commission changed rules and made a duopoly available so that you could expand your coverage. And that's how Foxy, being one of the first FM stations, was able to do that because there was no other station in the market at the time other than WSHA, and even WSHA's coverage, I think the radius may have been like 25 miles in all directions.
Yeah, and they expanded what in like 79 maybe a little bit.
Shaw?
Yeah, I know they eventually
Yeah,
expanded
yeah, yeah. And it may have been less than that. It may have been like a 10-mile range before that.
12,600 watts in 79.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I understand what you're saying. And Foxy, what FM free what
It
call
was 107.1.
7.1.
And so when the duopoly um, came about through the FCC, they simulcast their frequency onto 104.3. And I don't know if they, at that time, I don't believe they owned the station at the time, but they did come to own it before it was bought by uh, Urban One Media. Um, so again, I mean, when you look at that time span, okay, so now that's from 1980 until 83, there was no FM frequency. And this is also, again, as you might know, when FM ceased to become the stepchild in radio because AM was the dominant frequency up until the late 70s, which really made no sense since the quality of FM was better. It just didn't make sense. But um, so yeah, Raleigh was very late. Yep.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And the savior was WSHA. So that's how a lot of people in the community discovered WSHA. Um, the problem was again as SHA evolved into the 80s that um, you just didn't have the level of a continuous professional staff, even though it's not something that you should expect with a college radio station. I mean, it's a training ground for the students. So you're gonna make mistakes. You may not sound the most professional, all of that. But it also opened up a window for volunteers for the community to participate, the ones that were interested in being on the air or may have been on the air before somewhere else and came to the station to offer their assistance because it wasn't a paid situation, at the time.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about next. Not just volunteers, but well, volunteers who were particularly focused on, say, public affairs programming in the community. You know,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to a show like Perspectives from Within, what other kind of unique public affairs programming do you recall from this time at WSHA?
Well, when I came back because I left Raleigh to go to Washington D.C. and I was able to work part-time at a station there, the first station that Kathy Hughes bought, WOL. Um, um, I brought back ideas from that, but uh, you asked me what?
I'm really curious what some of the other public affairs programming was
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what you
during your
said.
time at
So when I came back, when I moved to Washington, D.C., and I came back to WLLE, I came back as a program director in April of 1980. And so there was a lady who was in the community. She owned a daycare, her and her family, by the name of Margaret Rosemary. And she wanted to do a public affairs show. And I can't remember, I believe it was her. It could have been both of us collaborating on it. I can't remember exactly, but the show was called Traces of Faces and Places. And so that show initially aired on WLLE on Saturday mornings because during that time, as a FCC mandate, you had to provide a certain percentage of public affairs programming. And so that was one of our public affairs shows that was very informative for the community. She hosted it. I may have collaborated with her initially on it. And then also around that time, WLLE was being forced to be sold by the FCC. So um, it was in the interim of being sold. And so once it was, I believe she took the show then was when she took the show WSHA.
Would you mind saying a little bit more about Margaret Rose Murray and sort of what you recall of what you remember about her and her time and some of the issues that mattered to her, if you can recall?
Well, her family was a very conscious family. I mean, they were involved in the Muslim community. Um, actually, I hired her son, Ike Murray. He was at North Carolina State and he worked on WKNC, North Carolina State's radio station during that time. But because WLLE was so popular, I mean, we were the popular, the only R&B station in the Raleigh market. And by then we had put together a very talented staff of announcers. I don't like to just call them disc jockeys because we were more than that. And so I hired him as a part-time announcer, and that's where he really got his foundation. And ultimately, he ended up being hired as a full-time afternoon drive announcer. And then he went on to work on stations in Detroit. Um, he's deceased now, but and as far as Miss Margaret Rosemary, um, she was just a very dedicated person to the community and wanting to impart, knowledge to the community and address issues that were important to the community. Her daycare, she had two that were located in the Raleigh community. Um, and again, she was just very committed. But I remember helping her to formulate, the whole format and programming for the show.
What goes into that brainstorming around a show, like Traces of Faces and Places? What kinds of things do you have to work through? What ideas are you all expressing?
Well, just topics, thinking about what the topic would be for discussion. And that's the start of it. So as I remember, which, it's been a long time ago, so I can't remember all of the specific details about it, but I would say just, a format that would be customary for a show like that. And it wasn't live, so it wasn't call in that I remember, and at least initially. She hosted guests and interviewed them. And it usually had to do with somebody affiliated with some aspect that affected the community, and specifically the African American community.
When you were at WSHA, did you work there throughout your entire, was it 4 years at school, or how long did you
Yes,
work?
yes, I did.
And when was your last year there?
1978. Right before I graduated in 1978, I got a full-time job at WLLE. So that's when I stopped working at WSHA.
And how long did you work at WLLE?
I worked there initially from like April 1978 to January of 79. And I was just ready to I was trying to get into a larger market, and I was just ready to try to do that. I mean, on my own. So I just I moved to Washington, D.C. Um, and took a job with the Marriott Corporation as a doorman. And I started monitoring the stations in Washington, D.C. And I started listening to this guy that was doing a morning show on WOL. And I really liked the way he was presenting his show and just all that was involved in the show. And I called him up one day and asked him if he would critique air check for me. Um, and he said that he would. And when I didn't even have it at the time, I had to come back to Raleigh and do an air check and bring it back. And so when I did, he saw potential in me, and he said that he would let me come into the station and practice in the production room while he was on the air. He came on the air at 5 o'clock. I met him at the door at 4:45 every morning because my job, I did work later in the afternoon. So I had an opportunity to practice their format at the time. And during that time, WOL was one of the major stations in the Washington, D.C. market, and had been for years. I didn't know a lot about it at the time, but I learned a lot about it later. And that's where I honed my skills in production at the time, and also simulating their on-air format and hoping to get into, that market, which was pretty difficult at the time. But the owner of the station, which was Sonderland Broadcasting, owned stations around the country in Chicago, Tennessee, Los Angeles, KDIA in Los Angeles. So I was able to put together air checks and send them around to the different stations. And I was willing to, go to wherever I got hired because I realized how much money they were making at the time. But I also realized later how you live and die by ratings. So as far as stability, it wasn't something that was great, even though I still was dedicated to, my profession. But while I was there, and again during that time, um, WLLE was being forced to be sold by the FCC. And so in the interim, well, when I left, because it hadn't been sold during that time limit period, the FCC forced them off the air. So they went off the air between February and I would say May of 1980. And it was a real void in the community with it being off the air. So Jim Goodman, who owns Capital Broadcasting, WRAL in Raleigh, um, petitioned the FCC to be the let's see, the caregiver, not caregiver, that's the word I'm looking for, but the overseer of WLLE while it was being sold. So they created a nonprofit called Faith Communications that was just basically the monitoring of, well, they facilitated the finances, but the team that was originally at WLLE came back, and the guy that was the program director at the time, Paul Ingram, um, became the general manager. So he called me and offered me the opportunity to come back to Raleigh to program WLLE. And that's when I moved back from Washington, D.C. to Raleigh and pretty much just emulated the same format that WOL had, which was another level up of professionalism, because WOL was in a major market in Washington, D.C. So I brought the sound of WOL to WLLE and introduced it to the Raleigh market. And I also had at my disposal the production staff who was, very proficient at WOL at my disposal. So I created a lot of liners and voice overs using their talent there. And we were a very dynamic station.
Thank you. I appreciate that. When we're thinking about commercial radio like WLOL and WLLE, what should we understand about what's different between these commercial stations and something like college radio at WSHA? And as a worker, someone on air at these stations, whether that's living and dying by the ratings or, what does it feel like to be in both of those different venues? What really stands out?
Well, again, I mean, on WSHA, it was an opportunity to really be more creative. I mean, you are more formatted in on the commercial side, and even though WSHA did have a format, I mean, you could deviate from some of that with your conversation. You weren't restricted to how long you could talk when you open the mic. Unlike the formatted commercial stations. So I would say that you have more freedom to be creative on WSHA. Um, and even though that freedom, in a lot of instances, if you don't have guardrails around the announcer, it could become obnoxious. You talking too much, or just don't have continuity between the music and what you're saying. Um, and then even on the commercial side, uh, it could be the same way in a sense, but the commercial side, I think, allowed you to understand and know how you were really relating to the listener. Um, and you could know that by them calling, saying that they like what you're doing, and some might call and say, "You're talking too much. You need to let the music play." So, but I wasn't the kind of announcer that really gravitated to just, you know, uh, that stereotypical image of what a person that's described as a DJ was, rhyming and just, but I understood about entertaining. And once I discovered how to relate to the music and the audience that was listening, that's how I developed my presentation on the air. And it was still, moderate, not over the top, but, good enough to be appreciated by someone that could appreciate how the announcer related to the music, uh, as well as the professionalism that you demonstrated while you were on the air. And it was an evolution, and it was because, me, I'm sure like other potential announcers or people interested in something like that, you listen to a lot of other people and you determine how you want to sound or integrate bits and pieces of what they're saying into your own personality. And that's how I evolved.
I also just want to ask, what did you make of DC when you moved up there? Where did you stay, and how was it different from Carolina?
Oh, DC was like my second home because my relatives lived there. And so I would go there all the time in the summer, growing up and listen to the radio stations there. Then at the time, my cousins and my relatives, were into music just like I was. And the city was very vibrant in the summer with outdoor concerts. And so that was the excitement about being there. And then there were parties. This is when I was in high school. Parties were at different people's houses. It wasn't at clubs and places like that, but it was a very fun time going there. So I became acclimated to that environment by going there early. And then also when I would go there, listening to the radio stations that my cousins listened to in DC, they had um and maybe three radio stations that play R&B music. And of course, WHUR was a college-owned radio station that at the time, even though it was commercial, they had the freedom to be creative. And from that creativity, that's where, some of the formats came out of that, like the Quiet Storm. I mean, the Quiet Storm, was a staple in the DC market for many years before it became a national format that was titled that. And even WHUR's Quiet Storm was more extensive and more broad. It was broader in the music that was played at the time, and that music was chosen by the student. And that was the other thing with radio back then. I mean, record companies a lot of times would put out a song that they wanted it to be the song, the desired song to be played. But on the album, the DJs and announcers, because if you had a ear for a particular style and a potential hit, that's the song that was played off of the album because you had the autonomy to do that. I mean, it's a more restrictive now with designated formats of music to be played, and of course, you have standard formats that already have pre-prepared music to be played, but the creativity of the announcers during that time was the end result of hit songs that were not chosen by the record company, but by the DJs on the air. But that was only available to certain stations and formats that would allow that. And WHUR in Washington, D.C. was one of the forerunners of music that was introduced to the market, whether it was jazz or whatever, because they could choose and know that this is a very good song that should be played. And WSHA was the same way with the students or particular students at the time that had the ability to audition the albums to know what to play. And I was one of those. And part of it comes with the passion and the ear that you might have for the way a song is structured. And so that's how a lot of hits were discovered, but not by the record companies.
Thank you. When you came back to Carolina from DC and you're working at commercial stations, did you stay connected to WSHA? Did you visit often, or how did you see
Yeah,
it evolve?
I did, but not as much. But I did, visit over there. This would have been in by 1980. So because I was so involved with WLLE, um, I really didn't get a chance to go over there that much. But students that came behind us, like David Linton or um, uh, just several other students that I can't recall at the time right now, but um, I listened to it, but they also listened to the new WLLE because it was a whole different sound, when I came back. Um, but they continue to do a great job at WSHA. And during that time, WSHA became an NPR affiliate station, I believe. So that was an added plus to the format.
If you had to answer with one response, what was most important to you about that station, WSHA?
It was the foundation of who I became. Um, it was, you know, an incredible learning ground for me, and exposure not only to the music, but exposure to students that were just as passionate about, getting it right and wanting to be better, um, and wanting the best. And we critiqued each other. Um, so, um, I'm forever indebted to Shaw University for that opportunity. And not only that, for the vision of either Dr. Cheek, who was the president at the time when the station, came on the air, sure responsible for being open-minded enough to even want to bring a radio station to a college, because prior to that, there was no other historically Black college that had a radio station. Um, and at the time, I didn't know that Shaw University was one of the first. And to create an academic program around that, um, to to be a medium for the community. And it also again was a part of my foundation because other colleges and universities went on to start communications programs and other the mediums for the station. And in 1984, I got a call from a friend of mine who I exposed to radio. He was in high school when I was in college. Mr. Vandergriff started this program called BEST. That was the acronym for four high schools or three high schools in Raleigh, Broughton, Enlow, and Sanderson together. That was the name of that was what best meant. And so the students from the high school would come and have like an hour to talk about what was going on at their high school on WSHA. And it just so happened to interrupt my jazz program, which initially I wasn't too happy about that, but I did get to meet, some aspiring students, and one who, became a protege and a good friend, um, Jay Holloway. And so he went on to go to Howard University, and he did work at WHUR. And in the summer, I hired him back as um, an announcer, and that was part of his training on WLLE. Um, and then other students too. And then in 1984, and this was after he had graduated, he had an opportunity to start a communication program at St. Augustine's College, and he called me to offer me the opportunity to build it with himself. And so nothing actually existed even though we thought it existed when we got there, but what they had was a carrier current radio frequency that they had gotten approved for. So Jay and I did all of the research to find a frequency that the college could afford, and that fit in the market. And at the time, it was an AM frequency assigned to the New Hope community, which is in Raleigh, and we were able to get the frequency 750, even though that was a daytime station too. But there were no FM frequencies available to try to acquire by the university, other than something that would be cost prohibitive if they were to buy it at that time. So Jay and I built the radio station, and we put together the communications curriculum. And in the interim, we got donated a low power television construction permit. And so we put WAUG, which is what we named AM 750, and WAUG TV 68 on the air. And we negotiated with the Raleigh cable system to put the TV on a cable channel that gave us more coverage, because the TV station was a low power TV station. And it only had a small radius. But all of that was born out of WSHA.
Yeah, so that's incredible. You're basically saying because of your mentorship to Jay Holloway when he was a student, a high school
Hmm.
student, participating in the BEST program, he goes
Hmm.
off, learns a lot about radio at Howard, comes back, and he and you together kind of helped to found this AM frequency station at St. Augustine's College. And
Yes. Yes, and then we also, and then also, because we were starting the program, we both went back and got our master's degree at North Carolina Central, um, so that we could retain faculty rank to teach, and we taught in the program, um, and and it in the major triple. When we got there. We also wrote a $500,000 matching grant to build a wing onto the radio station that they had already gotten a grant from Pew Foundation, for the radio and the equipment at the time when we came there. But yeah, we expanded the whole program. And continue to develop our own skills, and have an understanding. Well, we had an understanding of academia, but it was even more of an opportunity to understand how it could be correlated with the industry. So, we were preparing the students at the time for opportunities in media, in various capacities. Um, and we also expanded the opportunity for the community to be a part of TV with the t television station that we put on the air at the time. And we simultaneously put both of them on the air in 1987. And I was there for 10 years, and he was there for 11 years.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask that. Sorry, along the way, you got married, right? And you begin to develop a family. Is that correct?
Yep, my daughters grew up on the campus um, between 1985 and 89.
At St. Aug's.
Hmm.
And what's your wife's name?
Vanessa. And she was in communication too, but telecommunications with AT&T.
Yeah, how did
That's
you
where she started.
did you meet on campus?
No, actually, we met at a party because when I was at WLLE, we also, as part of the community, provided entertainment. So we formed a group of the station called the Super Jocks. So we would hold community events for the community, playing music and providing just entertainment for outdoor activities like Pullen Park or Chavis Park back at the time. Um, and we became very popular because wherever we went, the listeners knew it would be a great time. So we gave parties as well. Collaborating with different clubs in this Raleigh market, um, and also participating in major concerts that would come to the area. We were the host DJs for, parties. I mean, for the concerts, like Teddy Pendergrass. We introduced, Rick James to the market. Just, it was the time and timing of all of that. And we had a very exciting time. And even with all of that happening, it was also during the interim of WLLE being sold.
Mm.
And it was on the cusp of technology changing too, because that in around 1980 became the death of AM as FM began to really take the forefront.
So what did that mean for St. Aug's and the station you were?
Well, for St. Aug, actually, I mean, and here we go into another area of innovation for St. Aug, because of our research at the time for the radio station, we discovered we had to be conscious of, the costs. We knew that we couldn't hire, professional announcers, to be on the air. And so we were on the air even when we put the station on the air, Jay and I, and we had funding to hire other people, but we were at a conference and we saw what ultimately became syndicated radio. There was a company called the Satellite Music Network that provided whatever the format you want, which is really what today's radio is like. So um, we decided to air a format called Heart and Soul, which was music from the late 60s, 70s, and 10% 80s. That's what we put on WAUG when it first went on the air. And it was very cost efficient because we didn't have to pay, we just had to pay for the equipment. And like any owner at the time with their arrangement, well, owners would participate in part of the revenue, but we didn't because we didn't have to pay anything up front. But we were one of the first stations to introduce satellite radio to the market, and maybe the second in the state. Um, and that was new to the audience because, it was live being delivered via satellite, but the announcers were not here. They were in Dallas, Texas. That's where the Satellite Music Network was based out of at the time, and it was the forerunner to what radio is today. And at the time, I mean, it was perfect for us because, it gave us a format with all kinds of other incentives in it and that we introduced to the market. And the only thing we had an issue with is when the audience wanted to come meet their favorite announcer, he and she was not there because they're being delivered via satellite from Dallas, Texas. And so, from an innovative standpoint, again, we were one of the first. Um, and all of this is rooted in Shaw, I mean, where it all started. Um, and that was a very great time as well. And it being the satellite broadcasting um, procedure, became the forerunner for other popular announcers like Tom Joyner, when he syndicated his show. I mean, but we had done that, 10 years earlier. But he discovered that he could syndicate his show the same way the Satellite Music Network was doing that. So that's how Tom Joyner Morning Show was syndicated and broadcast nationally, um, out of that new technological innovation of satellite radio, which is really a copy of how TV networks use that, whether it's ABC, CBS, or NBC, when delivering their news in the evening. So that technology was already there. It just was then applied to radio. And that's how syndication started in radio. And some took off, some didn't, like Donnie Simpson's show that he introduced in 94 did not take off. So his show was never syndicated, even though he was a great announcer or is a great announcer. But Tom Joyner's did, and others did as well.
Thank you. That's really interesting. That's a legacy of WSHA and
WAUG.
WAUG and the work going on in this period that I hadn't been considering. What else do you think is the legacy of a station like WSHA today?
I think just the community that it embraced. And there were many, many people before me. Um, and many of them went on to work in media in other places, or other jobs. When I look at communication, and it is a broad major, but it prepared me for whatever opportunity, whatever other opportunity I experienced, because my foundation was rooted in one, presenting, so I knew how to present myself. And also was rooted in creativity. Um, and it was a part of something that's going to never die, which is music and information. And I'm still benefiting from that now. I mean, look at where we are. I mean, this was never something that we would have thought of 50 years ago, to be able to communicate this way on a computer, via what's called Zoom. I mean, back then it was called, let's see, what was it called when they used to have boxing matches and they, um, closed circuit. That's what it was.
You mentioned being able to present. I did want to ask, in terms of method, when you're an on-air announcer,
Mhm.
what goes into cultivating that identity? Or yeah, how do you understand making an identity on the air?
Well, I think it's through knowledge of everything, knowledge of who your audience is, knowledge of the music, if it's music that you're playing, knowledge of information, um, and being able to just recall information, because I mean, it is a great uh, um, standard to have something scripted, but if all of a sudden your script drops or it goes blank, you have to be able to ad lib or still articulate whatever you're saying if you're on the air live. Um, and so, in order to do that, you need to have um, a plethora of information in your head or be able to relate some way or other to carry on that way. And it's about a level of consciousness, awareness, um, you being well read across a variety of different subject topics, or knowing the market that you're in for one thing, certainly helps.
Maybe we're along those lines, but what words of advice would you give to your early career self?
What?
What words of advice would you give to your early career self?
Well, just continue to hone your skills and um, you know certainly treat people like you want to be treated. I mean, because a lot of times being on the air, people have this image of you that they think is you, and a lot of times the image that you project on the air is not the person that you really are. You become another person when you open the microphone and you're talking and engaging, and people hear you and like you and want to meet you. And so you have to always be conscious of how you treat people because, you never know if you offended somebody, how they might remember that. And I've met a lot of people in my travels, I mean, even back here, that remember when I was on the air, or, remember meeting me at some point in time, and either appreciated what I did or said. And I might not remember that myself, but I'm glad that I treated people like I would have wanted to be treated, even if I didn't know you. Because in fact, we were local celebrities. So um, and with this kind of business, entertainment or anything like that, where you're high visible, you just can't really get too convinced of yourself because you know then it has a false sense of sometimes who you are can be. And I just always tried to stay grounded and make sure, and it didn't have to do with, just being on the radio. I mean, I treat people like I want to be treated, period. That's how I was raised.
Yeah, thank you. What have you learned about yourself doing this work, maybe in radio, but also as an instructor? Did that change anything about how you saw yourself and what you did?
Oh, absolutely. Because even when I went to St. Augustine's College, I had never taught a class before. So, preparation, just again, being able to um, know and tell my students that, this is not just about me. This is a teaching learning process.
And what accomplishment are you proudest of from your career?
Um, I'm proud that one, I had opportunities to be on the cutting edge of introducing new technology and learning myself. Um, I'm proud that I have students that have gone on to have careers themselves and thank me for that, and remind me of how I helped them. And I also let them know how I was inspired by them. Um, so just the ability to help guide someone else uh, is a proud moment, and be reminded that everybody has to help somebody, and so those are some of the things that I reflect on. I was just on campus during homecoming and in the library, and just reflecting on when I used to be there, and also knowing that a lot of my classmates who are not living anymore are not here, and how blessed I am to be able to come back and also to give back to the university in as many ways as I can, and then even participating in the alumni chapter to support the university um, is very gratifying, and it's and the memories ingrained that I know that if it was not for Shaw, I would not have been able to experience the things that I did. And those experiences and even conversations about them, I have always passed down to my daughters. And they went on to go to North Carolina A&T State University. In high school, they were in the band, but their experiences in the band were not like mine, because it just wasn't, well, different band directors and experience, but they can appreciate, you know, what I experienced in the bands, especially at the historically black colleges, because it is a difference. I mean, in the way that you um, present, the creativity that goes into that. And even when when I was at Shaw, our band director was writing music for North Carolina State's band. Um, and that was also the difference, that from high school to Shaw, our band directors wrote the music. If we brought a song to them that we thought would be good for the band to play, they could transpose it onto the charts, and that's what happened. And during that time, right around the time when I was there, Stevie Wonder was on a board at Shaw, and he had donated um, equipment, sound equipment that we used on the field when we performed. Um, with a singer, we were the orchestra for a singer that might be singing a song. Or we did "Distant Lover," Marvin Gaye, but we had a male vocalist singing. And of course, the song that reminds me most about being in the band, well, a couple of songs during that time was Stevie Wonder, "I Wish." When that song was transposed for the band, we killed it. And then of course that was around the time also that Barry White was being introduced to the market, his music, and because it was orchestrated, um, all the parts were there, perfect for a band. And then one of our band directors went on to play for the Barry White Orchestra. He played trumpet.
That's amazing. I was actually talking to a GM here at Texas Southern here in Houston who said that he I think had played drums in the Barry White band. I'm not sure if it was at the same time or not.
Well, one of the things that well, there's Southern and there's Texas Southern, right?
So, yeah.
Yeah, so band directors that were at Shaw in 70, after 78, they left and went back to Tennessee State, which was their alma mater. But you know, they used to share their music with Southern, and different ideas and aspects of it. But yeah, and he's deceased now. At least the one of them is. But um, every time I hear or I go to a college HBCU game, it makes me want to go back to college and be in the band.
Yeah. I want to talk more about that, but probably not relevant for this interview. I had a great time at a recent basketball game at Texas Southern, and the band was the
Oh,
best part.
oh yeah, I'm sure you did. Yeah, I was in the pep band. I was in the concert band there, and the band is the element that, it brings everybody together the most. And there's just so much creativity around that. It's just incredible. I've watched some videos. Sometimes I was just watching recently, and it might have been Southern's band, but also Bethune-Cookman's band. And it's competitive. So, and it's become more competitive. It wasn't as competitive like that when I was in school. Competitive meaning amongst each other and the things we do, but it was competitive and it was highly creative and intense. Um, and so we had the combination of band directors who were innovative enough and students who were also creative and disciplined enough to implement the vision that they had and also participate in creating a vision for the band when we were there. And Shaw's band has continued that legacy of that.
Yeah. Well, radio brings people together as well. I'm wondering if you can define for us, what is Black radio and what makes it special?
I think because Black music has always been popular amongst all races. It it's always welcomed when you hear it. I mean, and it affects you. Even with the innovative changes over the decades, it still affects you in certain ways. And I believe it's the creativity, it's the ability to to bridge and integrate the harmonies and structures of how a song is written based on that person's creativity. I mean, and it's just a talent that is innate in the genes of Black people. That's the only thing I can think of how to describe it. It's an incredible DNA. I mean, I was watching the Luther Vandross documentary recently, and up till Luther, everybody always held Sam Cooke in the highest regard, and he was certainly an incredible artist. But Luther Vandross had just took it to just a whole nother level of creativity that is only God given. I mean, it's a focus too that you have to decide if you're going to be focused, but some talent and a lot of talent is not taught. And that's what I know about the creativity in the music.
What about the radio as a medium?
You mean now or
Black radio, why is access to radio important? Along those.
well, I think because one, it can be a friend to the listener.
Mm.
Um, Even though now we have so many different mediums that we can listen to, music or whatever. Um, it can teach, it can entertain. I mean, if it's used properly, it can be, commanding, intoxicating. And that is what's translated into dollars if it's a commercial situation where people keep coming back and listening. So the magnetism of it is based on, you know, creativity, whether it's even in talk or even music, because it doesn't necessarily have to just always be music. But it is rooted in something that the listener or viewer can gain from it. And there are certain people that have an ability to be able to captivate a listener, uh, you know, with audio or even visually, that keeps them coming back. And and I think it's just rooted out of the oration of like ministers. I mean, the black church is entertainment, and people go there to get wisdom and be inspired and blessed, but they also go there to be entertained. And if you have that ability to captivate your parishioners in that manner, just with speaking, they're going to keep coming back. And then when you add the element of music, um, it affects you in a different way. And that way is an inspiration. And everybody needs to be inspired. And that's why some songs that you hear and vocally or instrumentally can bring tears to your eyes. And I'm telling you, every time I hear Soulful Strut or uh, Grazing in the Grass, it takes me directly back to when I first heard the song. I first heard Grazing in the Grass and Soulful Strut when I rode with my aunt to New York one summer. I was in the sixth grade, and the neighbor had a speaker in the window. And because they were 45s, it kept playing the songs over and over again. So that's what I remember that every time I hear the songs.
That's beautiful. Just a couple more here. We ask all our narrators this, projects like the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, why do you think that work is important? Why do you think it's important to document this history?
Well, because just like you talking to me, you wouldn't have known what you know now if you hadn't talked to me. And everybody at Shaw didn't experience this. Even some of the students that were there before I was there, they experienced WSHA while they were there. I ended up staying in the market and seeing the evolution of a lot of different things. So I'm qualified to talk about it. It's not that I know everything, but I'm glad I was a part of a lot of things that helped to transform this community through the medium of radio, WSHA, and WLLE in particular. And simultaneously, when I met my wife, she was with just joined AT&T. So being able to be a part of a technological revolution and evolution of telecom and communication, um, it's like I was a part of history, between the mid 70s till now, because I remain involved. I mean, anytime I go to a different city, I tune into the radio stations to find out what's going on in the market. And not just black radio. I mean, I listen to, and it's just me. I mean, everybody doesn't do this, but I listen to a cross sector of music, and the way it's presented and what's going on. Um, I mean, and some of that came out of us monitoring other stations in the market from when we were in radio and when I would go to different places. But it's a way to keep up with what's going on across the board. Because if you put your product out there like that, somebody's listening to you the same way.
Sure. So, you had a lot of life after the 80s and early 90s as well that we haven't been able to cover here. So I want to know, is there anything you want to speak to in your career, in your family, in your life, bringing us up to the present, and what gives you meaning today?
Well, yeah, just all of the experiences, your life doesn't always go like you want it to go, but in every aspect of it is um, information and experiences that you can retain and also pass along. And so I'm thankful that I've been exposed to a lot of different uh, mediums. My career path didn't continue just in radio, but it continued in communication. So the reason that I believe I can communicate well and also magnetize individuals to me is just because of the persona that was rooted in my experience growing up and in Shaw University and WSHA being an intricate part of that. Um, so, in fact, I was in Starbucks yesterday, braving the snow and uh, picking up some coffee for my wife. And the 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 waiter or customer service person there, his name was I forget the whole name, but in her name was Shaw, WSHA. It was WSHA, and then something else to describe her name. I can't pronounce the name exactly now, but I said, you have my alma mater in your name. This was just yesterday. So, Shaw is embedded in my life, and I'm very happy that I had an opportunity to experience Shaw, even with all of the ups and downs that the institution has had, just like any institution might would have. Um, it will always remain dear to me because if it had not been for Shaw, my talents may not have been brought out in the same way. And even after Shaw, I was able to continue to support other HBCUs. When North Carolina Central's radio station was first put on the air, and I had moved to Charlotte, I got a call from the Chancellor, Dr. Julius Chambers, to offer me the position to come there to run the station. But, I was already positioned in Charlotte at the time. But I kept up with the evolution of the station. I have visited the station over there. Um, and because let's see, when I pursued my master's there, they didn't have the station on the air at the time. But you know, um, actually before the station came on the air, they used WSAUG in a couple of instances. We had a class that we were taking as part of the master's program, and we hosted the class over at the stations a couple of times during that semester.
Thank you. Yeah, well, now that's sparking more questions, but I can't take up all your time here.
Hey, I'm available right now. Whatever you want to ask me, I mean, go right ahead.
Did you have any more involvement with WNCU over the years or any other?
No, not directly. I did not. Um, I knew people that were over there, but well, actually, um, well, Shaw graduate, who was a couple of years behind me, went on to be the general manager for WNCU.
Are you thinking of Edith? Or
Yeah, Edith was behind me. She was I believe 2 or 3 classes behind me.
I guess Edith Lee at the time?
Edith, yeah, Edith Lee. Yep.
Yeah,
And David was as well. So when Elizabeth City was ready to start their program, they tapped him, and Mr. Vandergriff was instrumental in assisting him, in that regard.
yeah. And did you get to know Donald Baker at all from WNCU?
Oh yes, yes. Donald, again, they used our station um, for before they put that station on the air, um, in different capacities. But yeah, I knew him.
Anything else that we've missed in this interview? Again, I know we can't get to everything, but is there anything else you want to get on record before we close?
Well, I mean, just that, WSHA was was a platform for a lot of students, that became um, instrumental in other mediums. Uh, and I would say that they all would be very thankful to Shaw University and WSHA for that experience, um, because many others went on to be in different roles in media or, different jobs that their experience in the communication program at Shaw University prepared them to become who they are. I mean, and it may not have been the ultimate, continuation of their career, but the experience in having been a part of the program was a foundation of their experience. And of course, the market here was very inviting to the students from Shaw, especially Jim Goodman at WRAL and the other station, WTVD, which is the ABC affiliate station and owner of ABC. So yeah, I mean, this was a good market to be in. You know, and everything happens for a reason. I just always remember it being behind the eight ball with um, businesses interested in putting an FM station in this market. And the first one that did, you know, and now it's history and you know, they went to the bank.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there for now. And Charles, I really appreciate your time and your willingness to contribute to the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. And I wish you well.
Well, thank you. And all the best to you as well.
Thank you.